that? I know you're not wearing masks because you're vaccinated, and I just want to say I appreciate that. I do. I appreciate your being Christ-like and getting the jab, even if it kills you. Yeah, you know what? Because sometimes dying, you know, that's cool. It happens. It's the price of citizenship. I'm just going to be sarcastic until Danny Goki's ready. It's a blessing to be here, and I'm glad the room has cooled down. Who was in charge of that? Who made that happen? Who made that happen? Because I came in earlier and I thought, I'm going to have to take the sweater off. It's going to get real. The subject of my talk, this was assigned to me, by the way. I think Ryan Helfenbein just said that here, this is what you're going to talk on. It's, is atheism the enemy of freedom? How retreating from faith makes us less free. Fortunately, I agree with that, so I can talk about it. But I wonder if, I mean, look, when you're at a place like this, a lot of people are already going to know this. But I wrote a book about 5 years ago called, I believe it's called The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. But that's, I may have had too much caffeine. Wait a minute. It's called If You Can Keep It, which is about America. And in the course of writing that book, I discovered something, to my mind, astonishing. This happens to me over and over. I discover something amazing, and then I'm further amazed that I, up to that point in life, did not know that. And I thought, how is it possible that I didn't know this absolutely fundamental thing? And what I'm talking about really is what liberty really is, how it's connected to faith. It's not just that, you know, people in the Bible Belt are rah-rah America, rah-rah faith. Like, there's an intellectual connection between them. And I realize it ought to be made in public schools. This is a foundational idea. And I think it was part of the culture, but it was really introduced to me by Os Guinness. Some of you know Os Guinness, I guess. And he's a dear friend, an extraordinary brother in Christ, but he's not an American citizen. And he wrote a book where he introduced me to something that he calls the golden triangle of freedom. And when I first heard this, I thought, this is insane. What is this? How come I've never heard this before? This is amazing. So now some of you, I can't see you, so I'm gonna, here we go. How many of you know what that is, the golden triangle of freedom? So, all right, well, you guys, if you know what it is, you can go take your cigarette break and come back in like 8 minutes. The golden triangle of freedom, this is so fundamental that I'll share it briefly and then I'll explain it. And again, this is Os Guinness came up with this idea, or he came up with this formulation. He says, oh, the founders all understood this. It's like, yeah, Oz, you put it brilliantly in this golden triangle of freedom formulation. And here's what it is. Freedom or liberty or self-government requires virtue. Virtue, in turn, requires faith, and faith, in turn, requires freedom. So it goes round and round and round. And so, to explain it briefly, now again, some of this is so basic that when it really occurred to me for the first time, I just felt like an idiot. How have I not really thought about this? But, you know, if you grow up at a certain time in American culture in the last few decades, and if you go to a college like Yale, you know, even if you knew a little of this, they're going to unteach you by the time you get out, right? Because these ideas are not popular in these sick, spiritually dark institutions. And so the idea of liberty, you know, if people say, what's liberty? And I don't mean what's Liberty University. I mean, what is this idea of liberty? What does it mean? I really think a lot of people don't know. In fact, I know that a lot of people don't know, and a lot of people older than me don't know. We have this cultural ignorance on things that used to be part of America, that we used to understand. So liberty, of course, freedom, is simply self-government, the idea that I don't need someone, a tyrant, a king, a bureaucracy, a deep state, an EU. I don't need someone to govern me. We don't need someone to govern us. We will be free. We will govern ourselves. Now, that is a radical idea in history. You know, I'm Greek, so I want to claim like the Greeks invented democracy, but basically that's not true, right? Like sort of, but there is nothing compared to what began here in 1776. There's nothing ever to compare to the wild idea of real self-government. And we ought to celebrate that like crazy in the culture, you might hear at Liberty. But it's just an extraordinary, bold, fragile concept. It shouldn't work, frankly. But the founders had this idea that it might work. Why might it work? Well, there had been a lot of revival in the 18th century. George Whitefield, the revivalist, preached up and down the 13 colonies like a maniac. And I'm not kidding. He was so prolific, preaching to so many thousands every day, that he makes Billy Graham and the Apostle Paul look like lazy agnostics. I want you to think about that. I'm sort of not kidding. Like, if you read just that chapter in my book, or you know anything about Whitefield, it's true. He was just a maniac, and a revival broke out. And people like Ben Franklin said, when people get Jesus, when people get religion, stuff happens. Crime goes down. Domestic abuse goes down. Alcoholism goes down. Interesting. Now, why would that be? You don't have to believe what they believe, but even as a sociologist, you observe for people to govern themselves, if they're answering to a higher authority, if they say, I don't need the state to use a gun to tell me not to steal. I don't steal because I honor God and I want to do what God wants me to do, and so I answer to Him. So I don't need cops or a government or whatever to force me. We need very little government. We'll govern ourselves. Well, the founders observed that a religious population tended to be virtuous and tended to be self-governing or have the ability to govern themselves. It's an extraordinary thing. And so they thought this is possible. But of course, in the old country where many had fled from which many had fled, they didn't have religious liberty. They had governments that were together with the church, with the established church. So the founders said, in order for religion really to work, in order for virtue to work, religion needs to be free. It needs to come out of the people. It can't be forced on them from without. It needs to be utterly free. Now, of course, freedom is a risk because you don't know if it's going to work. Maybe you will... If you make religion free, people won't have religion. But they said, we're going to try this because we think this is the only chance freedom could really work. And of course, in the old country, people would be forced to be part of the establishment church, whatever it was, whether it's the Lutheran Church or the Catholic Church, whatever, and it didn't work. And we know that the revolution in France was anti-clerical. They murdered the nuns and priests and monks, along with the aristocrats and the monarchy. They saw religion as part and parcel with the power structure governing them, that they wanted freedom from. But Tocqueville, when he came to America in 1826, he observed exactly the opposite was the truth here. He said, here, because religion is free, because people can go wherever they like to church or not go to church or go to mosque or go to temple or be an atheist, it seems to work, and it seems to cause freedom to flourish. Freedom causes faith to flourish, faith causes... So round and round it goes, the golden triangle of freedom. So there is no doubt, it's like a math problem. You don't have to like it, but it's math. There is no way to have American-style self-government without virtue, and practically speaking, it's impossible to have virtue without robust faith. Usually robust Christian faith. I won't go into that now, but it's just a fact. And if you have robust Christian faith of the best kind, it is not a theocracy, right? It's not like, the Pilgrims or the Puritans were a little heavy-handed, but later on we figured out we're going to have real freedom. We're not going to brand you with a letter if you do something wrong. I guess you didn't read those books. It's okay, many of you are young, but... the fact is that, you can look back to these periods and you realize that it was theocracy, just like a Muslim theocracy or just like an atheist state, Marxist state, where religion was forced. But the founders said, no, we're gonna have true religious liberty. And it is such a remarkable thing in history, but there is no way around it, that real liberty, real self-government on the American model cannot work without faith. And I have to say, real religious liberty means that you value the atheist and the Jew and the Muslim and any kind of a Christian, except like maybe the Episcopalians, because they're just like off. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a carve out for them. But I'm in a part of the world, actually, where there are probably a couple of good Episcopal churches, so I take it back. But up north, nah. So the fact is that there's no way around it. We have to honor people no matter where they are on the faith spectrum. That's what freedom is, and that's what self-government is, and that's just the way it works. But conversely, if you do not have robust faith, which you can't force, but if you don't have it, if you don't encourage it, if you don't inculcate the idea that this is part of what helps us to be free, then what happens? Well, you see the spectrum. You can see it now more clearly than ever. Marxism, whether it's cultural Marxism, BLM, Antifa, whatever it is, Chinese Marxism, it is always somehow atheistic. Well, we used to, in the 50s, we would say godless communism, right? Now, I was not alive in the 50s, but I remember a lot of stuff from before I was born. I read books, and so you're responsible for this information. So we used to say godless communism, and even when I was growing up in the 70s, we would say godless communism. In other words, the idea was that what we have stands in contrast to what they have in the Soviet bloc, where they don't believe in human rights, they crush the opposition, they are cruel, they don't believe in freedom, and they don't believe in God, and they enforce atheism. Yuri Gagarin, the cosmonaut, you know, when he went up, he said, like, yeah, I didn't see God, you know, I didn't, like, they would mock God in the Soviet Union. So I find it interesting that no matter where you look, you can't escape the idea that when you move away from freedom and you have big state government, a powerful government, the more powerful the government is, the less freedom you have, the more they are inclined either to be forcefully atheist, or at least never to want to honor people of faith. Because faith frightens power. The Uyghur Muslims are being persecuted in China. Why? Because they say, we believe in a higher power. This is our identity. We believe in Allah. Okay, now I don't agree with their faith, but the point is, if they're in America, we don't say, no, you can't be an American and have that faith. In China, they say you can't be Chinese and have that faith. So we're going to persecute you horribly in the same way that the Soviet Union persecuted satanically Jews and Christians. The faith in God is the greatest threat to Marxist regimes, and I really think that it's something that we're being forced to see in a way that we haven't seen it in our lifetimes. It's coming to a head, and we're seeing that there's a secularization that has happened. If you actually think about it, the Establishment Clause in the Constitution, I mean, basically, our government is establishing a secular kind of religion. It is established, but technically they say they're not, but they are, because it's a view of the human person, transgenderism, whatever that is, but it's not reality. The idea of pansexuality, the idea that all those are religious issues, they're ultimate issues. And so when the government begins to force some version of them, it's no different than, you know, giving a lot of money to Solindra or bailing out banks or whatever it is. It's you choose who will fail. And that is not a free market. It's not a free market of ideas. It's not America. But it's been happening, and it's been happening on our watch because most Americans haven't really understood the way this stuff works. And so it's why I wrote that book about it. But I have a new book out now called Is Atheism Dead? And I guess there's good news because, ironically, since God is the God of truth and reality, there's no avoiding him. And if you hate him, it's going to be frustrating for you because he's the God of reality. He's the God of truth. And I think that the reason I titled the book is Atheism Dead is because in 1966, Time magazine asked, is God dead? And there was this secular movement that was kind of reaching this high watermark at that point, and that narrative kind of got stuck in the 60s, and we've never moved away. So that the evidence for God, for example, from science, you never really hear much about it. You never hear. Basically, we got stuck in a secular narrative, which also, as makes sense, is a somewhat anti-American narrative, an anti-patriotic narrative. It all goes together, right? If you don't love American-style freedom, if you're more inclined toward, collectivism, socialism, communism, Marxism, cultural or otherwise, you're going to be kind of anti-God, anti-patriotic. When somebody says, God bless America, you can say, what about all the other countries? Which is, of course, unbelievably stupid, but we don't have time to get into that. So, it's like, God bless you, Bobby, so you hate all the other children in the playground. Yeah, it's kind of basic. But the fact is that science, since roughly 1966, since the cover article, Is God Dead?, science has, with tremendous irony, more and more and more and more, to the point of now it's open and shut, has been pointing to a creator God. There's no doubt about it. Now, the only shock is most of us haven't heard any of it, so you're thinking, how's that even possible? I'm here simply to tell you it's true. I wrote about it in the book. It is shocking because we've been laboring under this secular narrative as though it's not even possible, as though science is the enemy of faith or faith is the enemy of science. That also is a secular lie. It's an atheist lie. The fact is, and I'll bet most of you don't know this, it is Christian faith that in the 16th and 17th centuries led to the scientific revolution and to modern science as we know it. Far from being incompatible with science, our faith led to science. That is historical reality. It's not Christian history, it's reality. But we've been laboring under these mythic ideas that somehow reason is at odds with faith. That's nonsense. There is nothing more reasonable than our faith. Our faith led to science. And I think in the first part of the book, I talk about how scientific evidence, some of this will astonish you. Obviously, I'm not going to go into it tonight, but the evidence is astonishing. And then it's further astonishing that we haven't heard it, because it will blow your mind that it's kind of open and shut. Atheism really is dead. The only problem is the atheists don't know it. It's kind of like flat earthers or, the Japanese fighters in caves in the 1960s still protecting some island like, the war ended 20 years ago, but they're still, The fact of the matter is that on the merits, the facts, atheism is no longer intellectually tenable, period, end of sentence. Agnosticism, of course, is, but not atheism. And I think the new atheists were tremendously intellectually sloppy and dishonest. Now, serious atheists like Jean-Paul Sartre and Camus, who looked into the bleakness of a world without God and meaning, this will also shock you, I hope, but both of those French existentialists who took atheism deeply seriously, who weren't happy. Anybody who takes it seriously is not happy about it. They know it's frightening, an absurd universe. What does it mean for us? There's no good, there's no evil, there's no transcendence, there's no beauty, there's no love, there's nothing. I mean, if you do the math, you understand that's exactly what that is. So you're not flippant about it the way Christopher Hitchens or Dawkins are, that like, I don't want a God watching me. Well, you're a horrible philosopher and you don't understand this stuff, and it's an embarrassment that people gave them as much airtime as they got. But the fact is that serious atheists like Camus and Sartre saw the bleakness of it, and both of them, to me this is headline news, and I don't know why I got to discover this and put it in the book, but both of them individually, separated by 20 years, right before their deaths, respective deaths, Camus in 1961 and Sartre in 1980, both of them came to believe in God. Now, that's a headline. That's a headline that the biggest atheists of the 20th century, the most rigorous, intellectually honest atheists of the 20th century came to faith in God. But isn't it fascinating that we don't know that? We don't know it because we lived in a culture that bought the secular narrative from 1966 onward that God's probably dead, And it's probably true that, science is at odds with God. And the more science we learn, the more it pushes God out of the picture. But the fact of the matter is that the more science we've learned from the 60s, the more it has pushed God into the picture. And people who are dedicated atheists in the scientific world are genuinely horrified by this. They don't want to talk about it because it's very embarrassing. And I have some fun with that in the book, that it's very embarrassing when science, you say science is that's my girl. I'm with her. And then you find out yeah, she's interested in that other guy, the Christian. You just be like, that's very embarrassing. Because I've been really public about how much I value science, and now science is my enemy. Well, it's kind of an amazing thing, but it's good news for us that at this time, the scripture, when the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord will raise up a standard against him. Now, a standard is a battle flag. The enemy has come in like a flood through cultural Marxism, which is, of course, atheist, which pretends to care about race, but doesn't even understand. There's no way from an atheist background, or even from a Darwinist background, that you can even say why racism is wrong. You realize how ironic that is, how hilarious that is? That's a fact. So, in conclusion, I just want to say we need to know atheism is dead. Those ideas don't work. And we need to be really, really bold about it. We've got to stop being shy. You wouldn't be shy if you understood, if you discovered something in science or in math, you'd say, I've discovered something. This is good. This can help us all. Our faith is consonant with reality. Science discovers a universe, and it glorifies God more and more. And I want to say, the more science discovers, not only does it point to a creator God, and again, I can't underscore that enough. It's stunning. It's over. It's game over. But it also glorifies God in the sense that you see God's fine-tuning of the universe, his design. The more you see of it through science, which we couldn't see 50 years ago, the more you are astonished at who this God is. It's almost frightening. It is frightening when you realize what he has created in the universe with a level of perfection that's just heart-stopping. And then you realize that this God, who is infinitely greater than I thought, because we always, we sing our songs, he's an awesome God, he's awesome, he's totally awesome. We have no idea how awesome he is. And if we get an idea, you want to have a heart attack because you cannot believe how huge and amazing he is, it's scary. But then you realize that scary God who created the universe out of nothing, who invented atomic structure, who did things that we just can't begin to comprehend, we're only beginning to comprehend, that God knows your name, loves you, sent his son into the world to die for you. That God, the more you realize how amazing that God is, the more heartbreaking and beautiful it is that he is the kind of God that wants to talk to you. It's unbelievable. And this is what science is bringing us. So this is exciting. But I kind of think in these battles that we're going through right now, we really are approaching revival. I believe that. I believe that when things get really, really bad, is it too partisan to say that things are really, really bad? Could things be worse? How about that? Look, I've lived long enough to tell you that Jimmy Carter is George Washington compared to some of the people that have been visiting the Pope lately. I'm not going to mention any names. But this level of ultra disaster is what is necessary to wake people up and to make people understand that without God, we're dead. Without God, we will be taken over by China. Without God, we will become slaves to a Marxist state. People are waking up to this. They're seeing how horrible things are. And this is God's mercy, folks. This is the precursor to revival, and not just revival, I'll go farther, to reformation, to us seeing that God is in everything. It is utterly inevitable. He is in everything. He is in science. We are no longer going to put him in a religious box or allow people to bully us into putting him in a religious box like they do in China. We're going to take him into all the world. We're going to take him into all the world, and we're going to be bold. And the demons are trembling at what's about to happen. Praise Jesus. God bless you.